Hi, I'm Grace Lynch. Welcome to my channel. If you like these videos, you can hit that like button and maybe subscribe, and then I can get data. Today's little video is about transcendent meaning, or at least exploring the idea of it. One of the most difficult factors in surviving aphasia and trying to having to re-understand what meaning was the feeling that there was meaning to be had, but being unable to identify what it was, why it was, what it had meant, connecting what I was experiencing now post the brain injury, which of course I didn't know I had, with the how I experienced it before the birthday party and stuff. And so, for whatever reason, I had a fascination with the beauty of mathematics, and later I also developed like a companion interest in poetry, especially image poetry, and in which I learned things that my teacher taught me about logic of the unconscious and stuff that I evolved out of his reading of Carl Jung's work. So it's a very strange and esoteric kind of education that I was having. So part of what I was trying to study in mathematics was the structures so that I could create my career. I was going to be a mathematician and understand what had been laid down axiomatically or in terms of processes, equations, theories, proofs, techniques, and stuff like that to facilitate the building and generation of mathematical understanding. But another part of it was also that I was trying to find linguistic structures that captured my experience of reality and meaning. Well, knowing it, I didn't know that. I was trying to find any kind of apparatus on which to build a scaffolding to leverage the difference between my private experience and my public one. Poetry, I had found that was very mysterious, that somehow in writing poetry, I would apparently convey meaning that I never meant to convey. And I'd read my own poems after I'd written them, and I noticed things that are glaringly meaningful to my inner life, that it's my poem and I wrote it, but I didn't intend to put it there. It somehow appeared there in addition to the linear and purposeful meaning that I had created. So that property of language had been very mysterious to me. And because I was studying both fields at the same time, I noticed overlap, intersection. I noticed things that did not work in a shared sense. In fact, very often I'd find myself making comments in a math class that are more a poetic sensibility, and the teachers would roll their eyes pleasantly. It was a weird way of thinking. And similarly, in my poetry classes, I would find myself suggesting structures that I see in a poem that seem more mathematical, and the poets would roll their eyes pleasantly. So it wasn't a hostile thing, it was just a weird thing. And from my perspective, not having any scaffolding at all, poetry and mathematics looked like the identical subjects. They were the same thing. They were the same process of language done in a different direction, but they were the same subject. And it was very confusing to me why the people considered them as distinct. I couldn't understand it. I remember I was in my early 20s and I was very, very frustrated because I was approaching all of this post aphasia. And so, without knowing I had that, without knowing that I was processing anything any differently, I couldn't understand why the humanities department was on one end of campus and the mathematics department was on the other. I couldn't understand why poetry was sort of the linchpin for creative writing and mathematics was the linchpin for the sciences, but never the twain shall meet. I knew that there were heroes like Lewis Carroll, Charles Dodgson, I believe his regular name is, a mathematician who gave us Alice in Wonderland. I know there were poets like Wallace Stevens, who was actually an actuary, mathematics high in the mathematical world, wonderful poet. So because I was exploring sort of this liminal space of meaning without realizing it, I naturally I was drawn to areas of any field at all, the flow of poetry that seemed structural and the ways of mathematics that seemed fluid, that seemed interactive, that seemed creative. And so I found myself noticing I took history of math as one of my classes, and I was good friends with a professor, Aziz Ibrahim, who had extensively studied the history of math. And so we would have chats as well because it was just a fascinating subject. And I would hear about the creation of the number 0, the creation of the number I, the discovery that the square root of 2 was irrational. In fact, one of my favorite myths in the history of math was one attributed to the times of Pythagoras. The Pythagoreans believed in a rational world, that all concepts, all true entities could be described as the ratio of two integers. And the myth goes that one of his followers, a young man, discovered that the square root of 2, which would be the hypotenuse of a right triangle with legs length size 1, could never be expressed as the ratio of two integers. And the story is that he discovered the proof of it and explained it to his brothers while they were out in a boat in the Mediterranean Sea. And when they understood properly what he was saying, they put him over the side of the boat and drowned him. I thought that was so funny. Historically, the acquisition of the number 0 as a number transformed the mathematical world. It came much later in the evolution of mathematical thinking. And it never established 0 as counting anything, but it was more that it was a word thing that we built a way, we found we could build a way of treating as if it were a number, so that in a sense we expanded what number could be to be able to describe mathematically more of our experience. We don't certainly count the number of times an object is not there. That's ridiculous. One of the reasons we can't divide by 0 is not because we can't create a concept of an integer divided by the number 0. It's because there's no way to do it uniquely and consistently so that it becomes a viable mathematical concept. It doesn't mean we can't create a symbol. It means we can't create mathematics with it, at least not as we understand it. So by creating symbols and word things to expand mathematical ideas, it gave us ways to describe more of reality mathematically. By defining the square root of -1 as I and then adding it to having a real component, it created the complex number field and allowed us to solve equations in a larger context, so to speak. What does this have to do with human language? Well, one of the weird ideas that I've had, because I had to live in an aphasic state, is to notice that if meaning for humanity, for human beings, happens only inside a context, then logically all of my adult life from 1987 to the present, because I don't have a context, must be meaningless. As a human being trying to recover from trauma, that's not a viable choice for me. I'm not going to simply dismiss all of my consciousness, my adult life, as meaningless because it doesn't have a context. But that slams right in the face of the notion that all meaningful meaning has to happen within a pre-existing context. So the two can't coincide. So then the question becomes like, if that's a kind of meaning, well, then it points to the fact that there's all kinds of meanings that exist between one understanding and the next. There's no way to take a traditional association approach to what meaning is and make it like that. But instead, I think it's possible, and how I find a helpful way to think about it is to expand what meaning can be. To suppose that there is a collective meaning that a person has from birth, and then they evolve an individual meaning that only they can have in response to their own emergent adult physiology. And there must be some kind of integrative space between them that is a larger form of meaning that integrates both. And by speculating that the individual meaning is its own kind of meaning, it's sort of like speculating that 0 can be a number. And that doesn't establish individual meaning as a collective meaning. Rather, it creates a potential to imagine a new kind of meaning that integrates the two. Just like math became larger when we integrated 0, when we created I, when we created radical 2, pi, the number e. These are ways that we expanded a traditional way of thinking to include something that could not be captured in that. And I look at transcontextual meaning, which is what I'm calling this, as a similar kind of idea, integrating, making a space for the individual meaning to exist together with the collective meaning up to that point. And that would be an organic thing that's in process. So I hope that was fun. Bye.